And so it wasn't until I was pushed to the brink of my own health that I really started to examine, I can't keep doing it this way. So I guess my question is, wow, how are we creating spaces so that people who were like me or who are struggling with the same thing that I was years ago can actually have that authentic conversation with their managers, with their supervisors, with their leaders, and not be shamed or outcasted?
Hey everyone, welcome to Student Affairs Now. I'm your co-host today, Glenn de Guzman. I'm also joined today by my co-host, Gudrun Nuyent.
Hello, everyone. And I'm also going to introduce my assistant co-host, Sammy, who's 23 months old and a little bit cranky today. So we're going to work with that as much as we can. But today we're discussing this known phenomenon that many of us know this is happening in our field, but it's difficult to talk about: the departure and retention of student affairs professionals.
So we have a great group of folks joining us today who are just going to share their experiences and approaches to transforming student affairs work. And what's really cool is that we didn't know this when we were putting this together, but Gudrun has connections to everyone on this panel. And so that's been kind of a neat little kind of offline conversation. So with our guests that are here today, we want to definitely hear some of the critical issues that they've been able to experience or research when it comes to the perception of increased attrition of professionals in student affairs and what we can do for the retention of the next generation of professional staff. So let's go ahead and get started. Student Affairs Now is the premier podcast and online learning community for thousands of us who work in, alongside, and or adjacent to the field of higher education and student affairs. We release new episodes every week on Wednesdays. Find our details about this episode or browse our archives at studentaffairsnow.com.
And today's episode is also sponsored by ACPA, an independent 501c3 nonprofit association, which is sponsoring the special 13-episode series with Student Affairs Now to celebrate its 100th anniversary, boldly transforming higher education.
As I mentioned, I'm your co-host, Glenn de Guzman. My pronouns are him, his. I'm the Associate Dean of Students and Director of Residential Life at UC Berkeley. I'm recording today from Livermore, California, on the unceded lands of the Ohlone peoples.
And I'm Gudrun Nuyent. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an assistant professor and program coordinator of the Higher Education and Student Affairs program at Northern Illinois University, which occupies the homeland of the Anishinaabe peoples, also known as the Council of the Three Fires. And I also serve on the ACPA 100 core committee. But enough from us. Let's get the conversation started. So for my panelists, could you please introduce yourself with your pronouns, your current role and institution? And Nick, why don't you get us started?
To Gudrun, good to be here. Name is Nick Fonders, he, him pronouns. By day, I do professional and career services work at the University of Chicago. By night and weekends, I'm a doctoral student at Colorado State, researching more equitable hiring using a complex non-binary identity lens. And I'm coming to y'all today from Atlanta. So I'm literally, across 3 different time zones, giving you cross-coastal realness. And I'll pass the intro microphone to my colleague Amber.
Hi there, my name is Amber Ulmer. I use they and she pronouns, and I am the Senior Associate Director of Residential Life at UC Berkeley. And I'm gonna go to Annalyn.
Hello, everybody. My name is Annalyn Cruz. I currently hold 2 different positions. So I have my own company, which is Grounded in Wisdom, LLC. I'm a dream life and leadership coach, a space holder, and a speaker. And then my other role is at UCSF. I'm an organizational consultant, and I just started with them a few months ago. I will pass it on to Kamal.
Thank you, Annalyn. And thank you for this opportunity again. I am Kamal Singh. I use she, her pronouns. I currently just graduated from my higher education student affairs program at Northern Illinois. Gudrun was an amazing professor for me. She taught my capstone. I would not have been able to do it without her. And now I'm transitioning into an area coordinator position at Carthage College in Kenosha. So I'm really excited for that. Thank you.
All right. And so Kamal, as you were sharing, you just finished your graduate program. You're starting a new role, right? Going into this field. As you're thinking about the newest generation of student affairs professionals, we know that they're approaching work-life balance differently, right, than some of the generations in the past have. And so for you, as someone starting out in the field, what are you looking for in your first job experience that is essential to your work-life balance?
For sure. I feel like that's something I struggled um, for a while, and I still struggle with it today. Like I said, my GA shit, my graduate assistant was in housing. So like I worked where I went to school and I slept here and I did everything here. So work life was very blurry. And there was no balance there. And I'm transitioning into another housing role for Carthage as well. So I think that's the biggest thing that I'm nervous about. But one thing I do appreciate, and I did appreciate, was how my supervisor was very much so holding me accountable in ways to make sure I kept a work-life balance, and I made sure that I was prioritizing certain things outside of work because this wasn't my full-time job. I was still a student. I was still trying to manage being a full-time student and trying to make sure that I did my role in the best capacity because I believe housing is the foundation for students that are incoming to college and making sure that they're taken care of. So that is still a huge responsibility for me, and trying to transition that into my new role. I think I'll be able to do it in a better way because I don't have school, but also I feel like just making sure that I'm given grace since it is my first time role, making sure I'm giving grace, making sure I'm giving myself grace, making sure I have that flexibility and that communication and collaboration. I thrive in spaces where where I'm able to work with other people and they're able to hear my ideas, I'm able to hear their ideas. And I feel like that's why I want to pursue in housing, continue pursuing my career in housing for a couple more years, is because being able to work with a close knit student staff and being able to learn from them and having that connection with them and helping them go further as well as with my residents, I feel like that'll be the best way of understanding myself as well. Because when I have these conversations, when I look back, I'm like, there's multiple times when I was advising students like, oh, maybe we should figure out a way to, like, you know, how you can do this and do that. And I would go back to my apartment. I'm like, damn, do I practice that? So I feel like I kind of see myself in those situations as well. And now that I'm transitioning fully as a full-time, I feel like I'll be able to hone a better way of tackling my days and a better way of conducting my work. Because if I'm not fully there mentally, emotionally, physically, how am I going to be fully present for my residents and my staff? So I feel like that's something that I'm not gonna lie, I think I'm always gonna struggle with this because when it comes to us, we're in a helping profession and we want to make sure the people that we're helping are taken care of. So it's something that I'm always going to struggle with, but I feel like it's a motivational thing for me as well to make sure that I'm okay as well. So it's a give and take process, but hopefully I'll get there sometime soon before I start in July.
Kamal, thanks for that. That's real talk. And I appreciate you sharing some of the challenges and struggles of achieving work-life balance. And I want to follow up that your response and push this question to Amber. Amber, you know, we worked together for a while, and I know that I've had front row seats watching you over the last many, many years, leading a refresh and shift in our own residential life department and how you attract and hire new professionals. And so is Kamal's perspective resonating with you? And what do you think is the most important factors in recruiting and retaining staff?
Yeah, it definitely does. And it's one of the early conversations that we have when someone starts to work for me. I like to sit down really right away and have a little conversation about, like, we're still working in a capitalist system. We have to understand that, you know, our personal boundaries are part of how we are able to show up fully for our residents in the moments that we are working and doing this good stuff. It pulls at your heartstrings because in residential life, particularly, we get to see people's absolute best days and we get to see their absolute worst days, and we want to be there for their worst days. And so I think for us, like, we wanted to think about how do you help people hold themselves accountable to creating boundaries so that they can have a life outside of work and have something that is more important than this place. Particularly for live on staff, it can be all consuming. And just because you cross a stage in May and you come work for us starting July 1 doesn't mean you've necessarily made the mental transition from being a student and being fully immersed 24 hours a day into this, into what is absolutely now going to be hopefully a flourishing life. And we have conversations with people. I ask people really early on, do you have a hobby? And then if they don't, that is one of the things that I follow up with people. I want you to have something that is so important that at 6 o'clock you turn the phone off and you go do that thing. And I want you to be able to take every single one of your paid days off, because it is really important for us to step away from these really intense situations that we find ourselves in working with young people. And if we aren't our best selves, then we can't show up in these really authentic ways in the hard moments. And I talk to my staff about, I want you working at 80, 85% max most of the time, because we're crisis responders and we are going to be called to 115% periodically in those really horrific moments. And I want you to have the bandwidth to do that. I want you to be able to know that there is a system in place that when you need to step away, you can. We talk a lot about the parable of the choir and how a choir can go on indefinitely because people are able to drop out as individuals, take a breath, and come back. And we all kind of do this at different times and find moments to refresh ourselves. I think we've also tried to put into place some strategic policy and or other things to be able to show that we're listening to our staff members about what's important to them. We have a really hard line: 6 o'clock, turn off your phone; 5 o'clock if you aren't live on. And, we really trust our duty structure that if someone needs to be called, they will be called and we will figure it out. And, we try to help people move from an individualistic point of view to a collective point of view. We really are here for our residents. We have to be really clear about what our purpose is and what our mission is and what our parameters are and what our problems are and what are the problems of other offices or resources or support systems. How can we be creative to tap into different things? And it's never going to be easy. I think it took me a long time to learn to put stuff down and be able to walk away. But I think the pandemic was a flashpoint for at least me as an older millennial manager to say, okay, well, maybe there is a different way to do this. And I have to be able to be willing to do that. It's controversial, but after 5 o'clock, I don't check my email. On the weekends, I don't check my email. I really do not work. I do have a couple organizational things that help my specific brain. So Sunday night, I take 5 minutes and look at my phone and, kind of order my thoughts about what Monday morning is going to look like. But other than that, I really try to disconnect, and I really try to help my staff members understand you also have the permission. And in fact, I'm going to be a little mad at you if you don't disconnect in these moments.
I love that, Amber. And it's funny, right? Because we went to grad school together. And so, me, when I was a grad assistant, it definitely did not have a good work-life balance, right? And it took me years to figure that out and get better at it. And I'm still not perfect at it. But and work-life balance is such a big part, right? We know from the literature around departure, and that's one of the topics that I've been studying and that I found is, right, work-life balance is really one of those driving forces that pushes people out of the field. But we also know there's structures, right, that are underlying our field and shaping our field that make it exclusionary or difficult for people to work in it. And so I'm going to turn this over to Nick, because I know, Nick, you've been involved with ACPA and the ACPA's 21st Century Employment Report, right, that really looked at how white supremacy culture shapes student affairs work environments. And I know your specific spin on that, right, is a lot related to hiring.
So I think you want to both complicate the amount of supremacist processes, but keep it as simple and as humanizing as possible. Amber, I mean, what you said really resonated with me about being there for their worst days. I think the story I'll tell is that a candidate who I ended up hiring confided in me after she had accepted an offer that she reached out to a person that left the field. And when I had hired this person, they were always interested in art. So they went to do an art career, but this candidate found a former employee on LinkedIn and asked them, "Hey, is it safe to work here?" And that person responded saying, "Yes, it is. Like, here's what Nick does. Here's why it's safe." And I think that's a really fair question to ask. And with how hiring was developed before technology, we really need to normalize that it's okay to ask really human first questions about the workplace and be prepared for people to ask those questions and not necessarily tell you as a hiring officer what they're really thinking about and how they're really going to make a decision to start to work, not to mention what might motivate them to leave the work. So, yeah, I mean, again, Amber, the being there for their worst days for me starts with a conversation in hiring and being able to resist fear and resist perfectionism and say, in a I had my housing days, I'm in a different functional area now with career services, and there are still emotions and anxieties that come both from who we're working with as colleagues and who we're working for as students. And if we don't really spend time both thinking about the conversations like this as colleagues that we're having and how that applies to educating students that leave after graduating with a degree and go to industries and sectors that may not be as humanizing or resisting supremacist culture, that's work that needs to be done.
Wow. Where was this conversation when I started out in my professional career? Annalyn, I want to get your thoughts on some of these responses. I know you specifically have had a very unique journey in your career. We entered student affairs similar time periods, and I know for you, you've experienced a career trajectory change, and I kind of want to hear more about you coming into the field, leaving the field, and then returning to higher education. But you have a unique take on why you returned and the terms that you came to an agreement with yourself. So could you maybe share about your career journey and what you would share with graduate new professionals and on when it takes to have balance? What would you share with them?
I have so many thoughts on this question, especially after hearing everyone's stories. So, thanks again for having me on the podcast. And I forgot to mention my pronouns, she, her. So, I had a quote unquote traditional student affairs journey. I've known Glenn for over 30 years, I want to say, or close to 30 years at this point, where, I was a student leader at UCSB, took some time off to figure out that I did want to get my master's degree in student affairs. So I did that at Colorado State and really wanted to quote unquote climb the student affairs ladder. So, you know, starting out as a coordinator and then moving up the different, levels that we have within the field. And I remember one of the best things that ever happened to my career was not getting an assistant dean of students role that I had applied for many, many years ago. And I was at first really disappointed by not getting the role. But what that allowed me to do was to pivot and think about what are other opportunities that I could actually lean into within the field, but still being involved in it. Fast forward a few years, and I discovered the learning and development role at Berkeley, where I was supporting student affairs staff directly with their own development and career pathing and holding space for them who are often holding space for other people and students. And that was a really important role for me to discover this other pathway of what it meant to support, develop, coach, and facilitate experiences for people, not just in student affairs, but I eventually left to go to corporate and work for a company called EA, Electronic Arts. So I was at a video gaming company for 5 years and got to discover what that meant, to be in a totally different environment than higher ed. And I saw burnout both in higher ed and in corporate. I experienced burnout myself 5 years ago, while I was at that job. And it really reframed how I approached work and how I approached my work identity. And I didn't realize until that point that I had poured a lot of myself into my career, to the point when I had to take a medical leave and take a time out. I didn't know who I was when I had to take that pause. And that was a really big life lesson for me that brings me to today that, you know, when I think back on my early career, I would often compare myself to my colleagues. I would often care so much about the students I was serving, um, the staff that I was working alongside with, that I just poured too much of myself into that. And so when we're in this field of student affairs where we're constantly caring for others, we're often told to put ourselves in the back seat. We're often told to, take this job even though it doesn't pay very much money, because we're here to serve and that's what you're meant to do. I I feel differently about all those things that I just shared here, but what I will say about that piece, that's challenging. That is challenging for anybody, to have those messages be told to you over and over again and get reinforced, sometimes with people that we work with, where we see they're also working 80 plus hours a week. And there's a point when one has to decide, is this the pathway for me? Like, do I want to keep living my life this way? Or what incremental changes can I make within myself to ensure that I am providing some sort of healthier mechanisms and ways to, if we're not completely balanced, because I don't think that's a reality, right? I think many of us shared here that it's not always going to be a balanced wheel the whole time. However, I think there are ways in which we can manage our own energies by not taking on others' energies ourselves. And I think it's very easy to do that in the types of roles that we often have here in student affairs. So for me, like a real practical thing that I do even now, so I've returned to the field as an org consultant. So I'm supporting, people on the campus and the health side at UCSF, working with leaders and their teams. So I hear a lot of conversations where people are sharing their hearts with me, right? They're sharing their struggles, they're sharing their challenges, and I'm coaching different folks along the way, and you hear a lot of pain and struggle. So I literally, at the end of my day or throughout the day, I'll take a moment to do some meditation, to take 3 breaths for myself, to walk outside, to do whatever I can to kind of dissipate the energy that I may have taken on in those conversations and in those moments. So the other thing I would say is that, we had mentioned taking the time off. I think Amber, you had mentioned that, of how important it is to do that. I had a manager early in my career who said, I want you to take your sick days as mental health days. There are days when we're not going to feel 100%, and physically you may feel fine and you want to push through, but I'm letting you know that that's also what these sick days are for. And I never forgot that. That was like, the early 2000s, when I was very, very early in my career. And I took that with me and said the same thing to other people who I directly supervise and manage, because I think it's so, so important for us, particularly if we're people leaders, to set that example for folks who are maybe earlier in their career, or if we have graduate assistants or just undergrads who also work with us. They're looking at us as examples to really support them. And, I think, Glenn, you may have told me this back in the day of, we're in a fishbowl, right? We're in a fishbowl when we're in a leadership role. And I always say that in all my trainings as well, is whether we like it or not, people are looking up to you to see how you're showing up. And, you know, I think that's just really important to share these stories. I will share my burnout story to anybody because I don't want that to happen to anyone else. It's a terrible place to be. But I think the more that we shed light on these types of experiences and support each other in that without shame or embarrassment, that will allow for people um, to share their struggles as well and to know they're not alone.
Yeah, I love that, Annalyn. I love hearing your story and kind of how, right, you really had to take that time off and change how you do things. And I think that's the piece. I think the piece that really stuck out to me was when you talked about, right, we go into this field because we care about students and we're told, right, this is for the students and we got to do these things. And one of the things I found in my research was that I know Sammy's showing us a car for those of you watching on YouTube. And right, we know that we do it because we care, but there's a limit, right? If we get burned out, then we can't care anymore. And I think that's one of the things that stood out in my research is this idea of self-sacrifice for the betterment of student is so entrenched in our culture that it's really difficult sometimes to say no, because you get that response. But what about the students, right? Don't you care about whatever it is? And so I'd love to hear from all of you, whoever wants to kind of chime in. How do you deal with that? How do you still put students first, but also put yourself first?
I can start off. I feel like going off what everyone has said, especially Annalyn, I just start sharing my personal stories and I think about how I've gone through. Like my undergrad journey is I thought very unique. Like it took me 6 years to get my undergrad degree. A lot of family stuff was going on. A lot of traveling back and forth. I was my primary caretaker for my grandma, so a lot of things going on. I never like had an on base where I stayed on campus and I did everything like a traditional student. I was a transfer student, a lot of things. And when I share that with students, they're like, no way. That's like my journey is so similar. Like it took me these many years. I have so many like family obligations and whatever. So I feel like hearing that and being able to connect with that with students, I feel like I'm doing my job. If they're able to see, if I'm able to share my story and they're able to see, oh, like, oh, this person who's pursuing a master's degree is doing this, has gone through the same things that I have gone through, then maybe I can maybe retain and go through my undergrad and pursue this and pursue that. So being able to like, I know sometimes people are like, oh, don't share too much, don't do this, don't do that. I'm a very vulnerable person. Dr. G knows this. Like I'm a very emotional, very vulnerable person. If I'm able to connect with someone on that level, then I know that I've done my job and I'm not scared of doing that as well. So coming back to like making sure those students are taken care of, sinking into that vulnerability a bit, making sure that you are being your authentic self coming into your offices and making sure that you are willing to connect with students in a way where they will see themselves and they'll be able to understand is very deep for me and very important for me. So if I'm able to do that and I'm able to follow up with those students, maintain connection with those students, and I feel like I'm doing my job in the best way I can. There's one of my staff members, she's doing her practicum right now, and she stopped by my apartment. She knows I'm leaving today. She'll probably stop by today, and she's commuting, and she always checks up on me and tells me, how are you doing? Like, do you need anything? So having those connections is so important. That accountability piece comes in as well, where people are making sure that you're doing okay, and that we're making sure that I'm doing my job in a way where they're doing okay. So I don't know, that was probably a whirlwind answer and probably didn't make any sense, but I feel like for me, if I'm able to connect with students on a deeper level, especially with my student staff, if I know that they're doing okay and then they're able to do their job in the best way possible and I'm able to help them follow through with that, I know my residents are going to be able to be taken care of as well, and that's going to flow down to them too. So yeah, those pieces I think are very important.
It's amazing. I have a question for the group. Annalyn, your comments resonated with me when you spoke about looking inward to see like what kind of things can you personally do to make reassess sort of how you look at balance and kind of make those choices. And then Amber, you brought up a point about sort of like generationally, and I think about, I'm a Gen Xer, and when I was coming through the field, it was just work. It was work. And then Nick, you kind of hit on the white supremacy culture. So this question sort of kind of combines all those comments into this one thought that I have, and I'd like to get you to chime in. And it's tied to the fact that sometimes myself as a department leader, I can only make so many changes within my department, but there's a larger campus expectation, and it's being led by folks who maybe are part of a different generation, or maybe don't have a full understanding of all the changes and shifts that are occurring in our field, particularly in residential life, in housing, where the student experience is evolving faster than maybe even our knowledge and capacity or grad preparation is setting us up for. So I guess the question is really about what kind of things can we do, or what are the things we want campus leaders to know, particularly about this next generation of professionals who are wanting balance, but maybe not sure how to pursue balance, because they're also trying to perform. They're also trying to show their professional competency in sort of like our capitalistic view of work. So just want to get your take on that.
Well, a phrase I say a lot is that no job is, it's honestly been liberating for me, and I socialize it with others. No job is forever, but a relationship can be. And when you say it that way, and I think maybe the best example to you, well, from my own experience, there are people who I've worked with decades ago that I still talk to. And I think that narrative is really reflected in this group having this conversation. And then I think from a functional area standpoint, I look at all sorts of different industries and sectors, and the management consulting space has really leaned in to, when you depart from, say, McKinsey, you can, a lot of people on their LinkedIn profiles and their resumes will put McKinsey alum. So they're identifying as somebody that may no longer work at that place or identify with that place, but if they feel connected enough to say, like, I'm proud that I worked here, how does that get applied to, and there's complications here because there are students who become alumni. So what's the difference between an employee who's transitioned out of an organization or a college, and then what's that mean for students? But if there's not an opportunity for a listserv or a newsletter or a way to stay connected and really feel like the institution cared about you the same way that we care for students, I think we're doing an accidental or deliberate disservice. So without campus leaders giving us to say, you may not be here in 2 years, but we care about the work you're doing today, and there's a space for you tomorrow. Don't think just because you've left that you wouldn't be, considered for another opportunity here. And maybe my one other point would be, I don't think we really normalize, when you have an offer from somewhere else, what the standards and expectations would be for counteroffering. So my other quick story is, somebody on a team I supervised a few years ago called me and told me she had accepted an offer, and she was the highest performing person on my team. So I was like, oh, like, you signed it, it's like, it's over. Okay, well, like, congratulations. So we worked on a transition plan, and then in the spirit of relationships lasting beyond a job, we went and grabbed dinner, and I was like, Mandy, never ever again resist, like, space for people to fight for you, to, like, there are certain mechanisms in place for that. But she was like, I didn't know. And I was like, well, oh, that's shame on us as an institution for not making it clear we would fight to keep you. And it's okay to pursue other opportunities. That's how work works.
I think the answer is so. I think part of it, I have had the benefit of for 6 years being the crisis responder at a large residential operation, 9,000 residents plus. And that really helped me realize that the single key skill that I got during that experience was the ability to create priority, the ability to say, not all of this is going to get done. So I need to figure out what is the most important thing. And I need to be okay with letting go of some of the other stuff. Or I need to right size the work because I cannot work 80 hours a week and that cannot be a sustainable way to do this. And so part of what I try to teach newer emerging professionals is how to create priority within your work. It is all going to feel really overwhelming, and I promise you, if we sit down and we individualize the system of your organization and administration to how your brain works, but we are clear about what the outcomes need to be at the end. I don't care how you get there. I just care that you get there. And there are going to be moments where you have to raise your hand and say, I need help. And so I think the second skill is being really honest about where you are in any given moment. I think one of the things that has really benefited our department is leaning into that someone's experience is only as good as their supervisor. And so we need to create excellent supervisors. And we started with our leadership team, because if our resident directors are well supported, they can really support their student staff. And so I think we're about to enter into a really interesting conversation about what does student affairs look like moving forward. I think again, my lens is residence life, and I think we're going to see an entire shift away from one job that has to be able to do everything to more specialized jobs, because being a crisis responder and being a programmer are really two different skill sets. And I think there are a lot of functional areas in student affairs where you are asked to do these things that are disparate from each other, and you may be really good at one of them and you may really struggle in the other, but that doesn't mean that your work isn't really important to the communities that you're creating and supporting. I think the other thing is, I'm always really clear. I try to get to know every single one of my staff members. I have 32 of them, including Glenn, as individuals, so that I can understand, where they want to go, what they want to get out of their experience, how they want to be supported, and that they don't see their leadership as these people on pedestals. I am a normal human being out here just trying to make it as much as you are, and we're in this struggle together.
Thank you, Amber. Looking at time, and I want to make sure that there were some really good points that are brought up, and I want to make sure that all of you have an opportunity to kind of weigh in and share maybe some of your final thoughts. We always close with the question. Well, we're called Student Affairs now, so I'd like to know, what are you thinking about now? What are you pondering about based on this conversation? Maybe something that was brought up and that you're asking more, you have more questions about, or some of the things that maybe you're thinking about your work and what's troubling you now based on this conversation. Annalyn, I'm going to have you start off this last question.
Yeah, what am I pondering about? I think it's twofold. One, going back to that last question, Glenn, around leadership and administrators, and are we listening to the needs of staff? And what I'm sitting with is, what are the spaces that we're creating so that people can share what's on their hearts, what's on their minds? When I was going through my burnout and struggling, it was internal for me, because I was assuming that people would just have a bad I would have a bad reputation for taking time for myself. That's how deeply ingrained what we were talking about earlier around capitalistic white supremacy culture. I have been ingrained and steeped in that for so long. And so it wasn't until I was pushed to the brink of my own health that I really started to examine, I can't keep doing it this way. So I guess my question is, wow, how are we creating spaces so that people who were like me or who are struggling with the same thing that I was years ago can actually have that authentic conversation with their managers, with their supervisors, with their leaders, and not be shamed or outcasted for that. So that's what I'm pondering about. And then the other thing is, I always like to think about one practical way in which anyone who's hearing this conversation could use. And what I would say is build in even 1 minute, right? Like during your day to step outside, to daydream about something else other than your job, right? Like just being able to kind of shift the energy within ourselves, because we can't change everything that's happening at our campuses or at our institutions. But what we can start with is ways to care for ourselves and to be compassionate and to give the same grace that we give our students, our peers, our leaders, like give that to ourselves and continue to pour back into our own cups, because that's how we're going to continue to thrive in any workplace, is doing that.
Wonderful words, Annalyn. Nick?
In the spirit of being as present as possible, because I heard all of that, Annalyn. I love it. I was thinking too, like, can you listen to the needs of, employees of spaces not created? I would argue you can't. And how do we model that? By taking time and space for ourselves. So frankly, I guess a thing for listeners and a thing for myself. Uh, for myself, decoupling what I've really frequently coupled in my doctoral work while being an administrator full time, taking a leave or a PTO, if you will, to start my qualifying exams and be totally present on that. And that's really exciting and fun. And no one's going to be mad if I'm gone for 2 weeks, really getting some writing done and making progress towards a degree. Like that's good for me and it's good for, everyone in essence. And I think your point about space, Annalyn, we tend to couple our people with our jobs and careers. So I'd contend for anybody listening, be honest with yourself. And if you don't have a best friend at work, or that there's a Gallup survey that people have a lot of contention with the framing and wording on. But the point is, if you don't have a person you can trust at work, whether it's your supervisor, whether it's a colleague, find that balance for you, let your brain breathe and like really lean into the community you have outside of work. That's okay. But student affairs has a pretty particular way of socializing that like everyone should be your bestie and you should get along with everybody and you should really be close. And that might not be healthy and it might not be possible. So if you're asking yourself those questions or you're wrestling with it, your instincts are probably accurate, and it's okay
Nick?
to
Sorry,
pursue
we lost you
that
the last.
support, the hobby framing you used. Weird.
Sorry, Nick, we lost you in that
Oh,
last 5-7 seconds. Could you just that last sentence, if you could restate it?
yes. What I think I was stating was both the find your people outside of work, that's okay. And to Amber's point, like earlier in this conversation, hobby is a word that some people don't know how to answer, but I think the options of a hobby and or daydreaming from Amber and Annalyn are great framings and options for you to just let your brain breathe, work hard, treat yourself.
Thank you. Kamal, what are your final thoughts?
Honestly, I'm just trying to soak this all in because I'm in a space with amazing people that have been in this field for longer than me. Shoot, I'm starting my first full-time job. So I'm just trying to soak all this in and take this going forward. Honestly, I feel like the whole part of being the best supervisor and making sure that I'm there for my staff, that's always been a priority for me. But I feel like taking that forward and honing it is like really something that's really weighing heavy on me. I have a month to prepare to have a reset and start my full-time job, and I want to make sure that I'm at my best when I go in my first week of July, I'm at my best. I know what I want. I know what I want to do. I know how I want to tackle certain things going on in my job and how I can do that, taking my staff with me. I don't like to use like, oh my, like they're following me. I love to learn from my staff. That's how I've come this far. So I want to create a collaborative workspace where like if I'm doing something wrong, they can be like, yo, come on, let's do it this way and take that forward. And if they have questions, I can help lead them in the way and help guide them in a way. So I feel like that's the biggest thing holding that I'm thinking about and pondering about, but everything everyone has said has been so beneficial and educational. So I really, really do appreciate all this knowledge that I'm gaining.
Thank you, Kamal. Amber.
Yeah, what I'm thinking about is the ability to be curious. I think if I know I'm in a good place, and I know those people who work with me and for me are in a good place when we can come at something from a curious perspective. And that is a real privilege, because there are a lot of reasons why someone may be forced into black and white thinking, or being dualistic, and I think if we can figure out how to teach curiosity, or how to cultivate it, or how to encourage it in our staff, in our students, in ourselves, it's a real game changer, because I find when I come at things from a point of view of curiosity, I hurt my own feelings a lot less. And I make a lot less assumptions about, what this person, why they did that thing, or how this outcome came to be. And if I, again, try to come from a place of as neutral a curiosity as possible, to think about this in the spirit of learning and how to collaboratively move forward, then I think we're in a good place. But I also am thinking a little about, Nick's staff member's question about, is this a safe place to work? And, how, as a department lead, do I know if someone would answer that as a yes? And, what are those ways that we can gather that information and still have people have bad days and bad weeks and hard semesters, but, would they still say yes? And, I think I've benefited this year from having a really hard year, but we had 2 staff members who came back to us, and they had left, and they said, actually, this place is special, and we want to come back. And that was a really good testament to us, that even though we're dealing with like some really weird things, that hope is possible, change is possible.
Gudrun, as a co-host, I'm going to ask you to also weigh in, because I know you have a lot of thoughts around this topic.
Yes. Yeah. And I love the conversations we've had. And I particularly love that there's been so much kind of practical advice, right, on things that you can do. Because I think we can get caught in that conversation on a little bit related to Glenn's question, right? Like we can only change so much. And then this like looking to the higher ups to fix the system and the structures without doing the parts that at least we can influence, right? But that said, I think for me as a faculty member and researcher, I am spending a lot of time there, right, with the systems and the structures, and wondering, how do we get campus leadership to really buy into this concept of needing to transform higher education, right? Of really fighting white supremacy culture and how it's ingrained in all of us, of really making those changes. And I think that's the piece that I haven't figured out yet, right? And I'm still grappling with it. I can write articles and publish them, and who knows who reads them? Probably the folks who already are buying into this, right? But how do we make some of these like big picture changes happen to really transform our field, right? Or thinking about, Amber, what you shared, it sounds like there's some amazing things, right, that you all are doing in your department. How do we help other people learn about that and really also commit to this and make those changes as well? And I see some of that happening in pockets, right? With an ACPA, there's lots of conversations on how do we do these things better. But I'm just still really grappling with this, right? And not just even the vice president of student affairs level, how do we get it to the president, the board of trustees level to really say, this is not sustainable, and how do we change it?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. In the I've been with this podcast since the very beginning. I've never answered this question. And this is going to be the first time I'm going to answer this question. because Nick, when you said your comments, your final comments actually hit me way in here about developing trusted work. I've been in this field for 30-something years now, and I think about how I always care and wanting folks to find balance, to have balance, but I know sometimes there's that pushback. Now that I'm sitting in this leadership role, I think about the fact that I have just gone through personal tragedy in my life, and I had to take time and step away from work. And I'm thinking about how much time I took off. And I felt so guilty taking time off. And I started thinking about my supervisor and my supervisor's supervisor. I think about Amber. I think about the people who are around me who have given me sort of permission to really heal or to take time to be fully present so I can give fully back. And so as I, really return back to sort of full time, I think about like, what are the things that I can do even more prominently as a campus leader to push for these type of changes, because we need to make sure that we are listening to our staff. We need to make sure that we are not just listening, but then really taking what's being said, what's being researched, and applying it directly into policies and structures. Because we have to start somewhere, because we also recognize that we have the ability to role model for other campuses, because this is not just a Berkeley thing. It's not just, it is, I think, more widespread, but we need to start somewhere, and we need to make sure that not only are staff members speaking up and voicing things, but campus leaders need to also act and demonstrate and role model that. So that's what's on my mind. I'm a little fired up right now, but I think this conversation is helping me just think about that a little more further. So I think we're out of time. Gudrun, I see you got your hands full, so let me kind of just make sure that we get our thank you to our guests. Annalyn had to go. She's doing her thing, coaching folks. I know we knew that she had to bounce out a little bit earlier, but this episode was phenomenal, and our sponsor was ACPA. And so I want to make sure that we give a shout out to ACPA. ACPA, College Student Educators International, celebrating its 100th anniversary, is boldly transforming higher education by creating and sharing influential scholarship, shaping critically reflective practice, and advocating for equitable and inclusive learning environments. ACPA aspires to be higher education's and student affairs' most inclusive and community-driven association by leading our profession in centering social justice, racial justice, and decolonization as defining concepts of our time and the foreseeable future. Throughout this anniversary year, ACPA is publishing interviews and think pieces about the past, present, and future in ACPA developments. We encourage you to consider contributing to ACPA's ongoing conversation about the future. Visit myacpa.org or connect with them on Instagram, Facebook, and X to learn more. Nat Ambrosi, our producer, love you. You're going to take this episode and transform it into something really cool, and it's going to be online really soon. So thank you for making us look good, sound good, and everything like that. We love the support of these important conversations from our community. You can help us reach even more folks by subscribing to this podcast, YouTube, or our weekly newsletter. Let your peers and colleagues, your graduate students, faculty know about what we do. And if you're inclined, leave us a 5-star review. So I'm Glenn, and along with Gudrun, Nick, Kamal, Amber, Annalyn, I want to say thank you to everyone who is watching or listening. Make it a great week. Bye, everybody.